Sometimes the most painful moment in a relationship does not arrive with shouting. It arrives with something quieter, a sentence spoken in a calm voice, almost indifferent. Do whatever you want. On the surface, it sounds like surrender, but psychologically, it is something else entirely. It is the sound of emotional withdrawal. And when someone reaches that point, the argument you are having is no longer the real conflict, because the deeper conflict has already ended. In the language of depth psychology, arguments are rarely about the words being exchanged. They are expressions of something deeper, two identities struggling to be seen, recognized, and understood. But when a person begins to speak in detached phrases, when their words lose emotional weight, something subtle has shifted inside them. They are no longer fighting for the relationship. They are beginning to detach from it. And strangely, the moment this happens often feels less dramatic than we expect. There is no explosion, no visible collapse, just a quiet distance forming between two people who once felt like the same world. Carl Jung once suggested that the greatest human fear is not conflict, but invisibility, to feel that one's inner life no longer matters to another person. And when someone reaches the point where they say, "It doesn't matter anymore," they are revealing something profound, not about the argument, but about the slow disappearance of emotional meaning. Modern culture teaches us to misunderstand moments like this. We assume that the worst relationships are the ones filled with loud arguments, raised voices, and dramatic confrontations. But, psychologically, that is rarely true. Conflict, strange as it sounds, is often a sign that something still matters. People argue passionately about what they still hope to save. What modern culture rarely recognizes is the far more dangerous phase, indifference. In a society obsessed with productivity, youth, and external success, we are taught to value efficiency even in relationships. We treat emotional conflicts like problems to be solved quickly, apologize, move on, stay functional. But the psyche does not work like a machine. Unspoken resentments accumulate slowly. Disappointments settle quietly into the unconscious, and over time, the emotional energy that once fueled connection begins to disappear. Carl Jung believed that the psyche protects itself when it feels repeatedly unseen. Instead of exploding, it withdraws. Instead of fighting endlessly, it begins to detach. Because at some point the unconscious asks a painful question: why keep struggling to be understood by someone who no longer listens? And when this question takes root, arguments change their tone completely. What once sounded like anger begins to sound like resignation. Jung described relationships as mirrors of the unconscious. We do not simply interact with another person. We encounter parts of ourselves reflected through them. Our fears, our hopes, our unhealed wounds. In the early stages of love, these reflections feel magical. Two people see themselves through each other's admiration. But over time, something else emerges: the shadow, the hidden frustrations, disappointments, and unmet needs we often struggle to express. If these elements remain unspoken long enough, the psyche finds ways to protect itself, not through louder arguments, but through psychological distancing. Viktor Frankl, the existential psychologist, once wrote that human beings can endure almost any suffering as long as that suffering still carries meaning. But when meaning disappears, something inside us shuts down. The same principle applies in relationships. As long as two people believe their struggles still matter, they continue to engage. But when one person begins to feel that nothing will truly change, they stop fighting. And that is when certain phrases begin to appear, not as weapons, but as signals of emotional exhaustion. The first stage is subtle. It begins with repeating the same arguments over and over again. At first, this feels like ordinary relationship conflict. The same complaints surface repeatedly. You never listen. You always do this. We've talked about this before. From the outside, it may look like stubbornness. But psychologically, something deeper is happening. Each repetition represents an attempt to be understood. The psyche keeps returning to the same conflict because it believes the issue has not yet been emotionally recognized. Jung observed that what remains unconscious tends to repeat itself. In relationships, unresolved emotional needs often resurface in cycles. At this stage, arguments may still feel intense, even exhausting, but intensity is not the real problem. In fact, intensity often means the relationship still carries emotional significance. The real danger emerges when repetition turns into something else: fatigue. After enough cycles of the same unresolved conflict, the psyche begins to conserve energy. This is when the tone of arguments begins to shift. The passion fades, the anger becomes quieter, not because the problem has been resolved, but because the person expressing it has begun to lose hope. You may notice phrases like, "forget it," "it's fine," "whatever." On the surface, these words seem like attempts to end the argument, but psychologically, they often signal something deeper. They indicate that the person no longer believes the conversation will lead to real change. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote that the most silent people often carry the deepest storms inside them. When emotional exhaustion takes hold, people stop expressing the storm, not because it disappeared, but because expressing it feels pointless. And this is where relationships quietly begin to fracture. Not through betrayal, not through dramatic endings, but through gradual emotional withdrawal. Psychological stage 3, detachment. This stage is where the most revealing phrases appear. "Do whatever you want. It doesn't matter anymore. I'm done arguing about this." These statements sound calm, but they are rarely peaceful. They are expressions of psychological detachment. At this stage, the person has already begun separating their emotional identity from the relationship. The argument you are having is no longer about solving the problem. It is about confirming something the person already suspects, that they are no longer truly being seen. Imagine a quiet scene. A dimly lit kitchen late at night. Two people sitting across from each other after another long disagreement. One of them stares at the table and says quietly, "Just do what you want." In that moment, the argument ends, but not because resolution was found, because hope quietly disappeared. Jung believed that when the psyche withdraws emotional investment, it begins preparing for psychological separation, even if the physical relationship still exists. And this is why these phrases feel so unsettling. They reveal that the emotional bond may already be fading. Psychological stage 4, the silent exit. The final stage is not loud. It is almost invisible. The arguments become shorter, then less frequent, then eventually absent. From the outside, it may even look like peace, but psychologically, something else is happening. The person who once argued passionately has stopped bringing their inner world into the relationship. They are no longer seeking understanding. They are quietly reorganizing their emotional life elsewhere. Sometimes this shift happens internally, long before any breakup occurs. You might notice small changes: less curiosity, less emotional presence, less effort to repair misunderstandings. Not because the person suddenly became cold, but because they already experienced the loss privately. Picture another scene: someone sitting alone late at night in the living room. The house is quiet. Their partner is asleep in another room. And in that silence, they begin imagining a life where they no longer need to explain themselves. That moment, more than any argument, is when the relationship truly begins to end. Human relationships carry a deeper existential weight than we often realize. They are not just about companionship, they are about recognition. To be seen by another person is one of the deepest psychological needs we have. And when that recognition fades, something inside us begins to confront a terrifying question: who am I if the person closest to me no longer truly sees me? Jung believed that the ultimate goal of psychological development is individuation, the process of becoming fully oneself. But sometimes relationships that once supported our identity slowly become spaces where our inner life feels constrained or invisible. In those moments, detachment is not always cruelty. Sometimes it is the psyche protecting its last sense of meaning. And this is why those quiet phrases during arguments carry so much weight. They are not just about the disagreement, they are signals that something deeper has shifted inside the soul. The argument may still be happening in words, but emotionally, the person may already be walking away. Yet, there is something important to understand about these moments. They are not only warnings about relationships, they are reflections of the human psyche itself. They reveal how deeply we long to be understood, how much emotional meaning we invest in connection, and how painful it becomes when that meaning begins to fade. Sometimes relationships end loudly, but more often they end quietly, through phrases that sound ordinary, through silences that grow longer, through arguments that slowly lose their emotional gravity. But if we listen carefully to these moments, they also reveal something profound about ourselves. They remind us that being truly present with another person, truly listening, truly seeing them, is one of the rarest and most meaningful things we can offer in life. Because the moment someone feels invisible, they may already be preparing to disappear. And perhaps the real lesson hidden inside these quiet arguments is not about winning them, but about understanding the fragile psychological bond that makes two inner worlds feel connected at all. If this reflection resonated with you, if it made you pause and think about the deeper psychology of relationships, consider subscribing and sharing it with someone who values thoughtful conversations about the human mind. Sometimes the most important insights arrive not through louder voices, but through deeper listening.